Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this NeuroFest event. We'll be taking a closer look today at digital inclusion amongst people with neurological conditions and the voluntary sector response so far. I'm Katherine Crawford. I'm the Director of Services at Parkinsons UK, and it's my pleasure today to be chairing this session. I'm looking forward to learn something from my fellow panelists. The pandemic, of course, has caused a rapid acceleration in our use of technology to connect with one another, to work, and to deliver care and support. Many organisations, including Parkinsons UK, were considering their approach to data and digital before the pandemic, but we've really had to accelerate and adapt more quickly than we anticipated. Many of the changes we've had to make in the past 18 months will have been positive, and I'm sure we'll be adopting some of them in the future too. At Parkinsons UK, digital thinking about the way we transform our services and the way we as staff work was a big feature in our thinking for our 2019 to 2024 strategy. I'd have to say that some of the staff were surprised and startled when we made the switch to Google, but all of that and the work that had gone on behind the scenes enabled us to adapt quickly to work from home in almost a seamless fashion, or certainly if you're not in the IT team it was. So that felt good. What was more challenging, though, of course, was reaching out to everyone living with Parkinson's in the UK. Again, we were already on a journey to transform our information and support services, a project called Parkinsons Connect, and we have been so grateful to that. As we've been developing our approach, gathering insight, we've been able to pivot, adapt, and move to shift and shape our services, and this is standing us in good stead as we go forward. However, we've got a big network of volunteer-led activities across the UK, and there was the rub. Those activities were all taking place in community centres, in gyms. You know the scene, you know how it goes. As time's gone on, we didn't want to pressurise our volunteers, but we've had a real groundswell of growth, of volunteers adapting, taking their activities online, and it's been fantastic to see. And it means now that through the pressure from our members and wider people living with Parkinson's, we've had to pull that digital inclusion at the grassroots level into our projects and plans. That all sounds so positive, but it's not that great. We feel that we've lost touch with a number of people living with Parkinson's. And of course, none of us know yet the full impact on people's health through the necessity of moving appointments to telephone or to virtual through the health services. We've a lot to learn. And broader society, we know that many people are at risk of digital inclusion. Back in 2019, the Topo review, entitled Preparing the Healthcare Workforce to Deliver the Digital Future, noted that we must acknowledge that those with the greatest health needs are also the most at risk of being left behind. We've got to build digital services with this in mind, ensuring the highest levels of accessibility wherever possible. And I'm sure some of us have been watching the switch off of the landline with some trepidation. The 2019 Consumer Digital Index showed 11.9 million people, that's 22% of the population, don't have the digital skills needed for everyday life in the UK. And by 2030, it's predicted that 4.5 million people, that's 8% of us, will remain digitally disengaged. On top of that, if you're living with a disability, you're 35% less likely to have the essential digital skills you need for life. Therein lies our challenges. As organisations who together hope to improve the quality of life for everyone with neurological conditions, no matter where they are or their circumstances, we've got to think fast and think how we can build our work together. With that in mind, I'm pleased to introduce a fantastic panel of speakers this morning who provide their lessons learned around the development of information and support services with the risk of digital exclusion firmly in mind. First, we'll hear from Pavi Brar, Policy and Insight Officer at National Voices. I've watched her work from afar. Pavi works to combat health inequalities, particularly for minority ethnic and other often marginalised community groups, and has a keen research interest in digital exclusion. Then we'll hear from Steve Duckett. Steve's the trustee of the Huntingdon Disease Association and provides full-time care for his wife, who lives with Huntington's. He's helped to oversee the transformation of HTA to digital and will provide some important lessons for us to consider. Finally, Gilles Wilkes, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at the Motor Neurone Disease Association, will provide an insight of the work they've been doing to reach out and support all people with MND. Firstly, over to Pavi to give us an overview of National Voice's work in this area. As Pavi speaks, please feel free to put questions in the chat box because we'll have time for a Q&A at the end of the session. Pavi, over to you.
Good morning, I'm Pavi Brar. I'm Policy and Insight Officer at National Voices, and thank you for having me here today at the Neurological Alliance NeuroFest, particularly the session looking at digital inclusion of people living with neurological conditions. And today I'm going to speak to you about some work that we've done at National Voices called Unlocking the Digital Front Door, Keys to Inclusive Healthcare. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic necessitated a rapid, unexpected, and seismic change in the way that healthcare is delivered. Many of the new approaches involved a shift towards remote healthcare that had to be rapidly implemented to enable people to continue to access care whilst being in lockdown. We at National Voices particularly wanted to explore how some of the challenges of moving rapidly to a digital access model could be addressed and how well-being could be supported. The aim was to explore what worked and what didn't, and to understand how VCSE-led innovation can support various health and care models. Innovation. Innovation is led by people first, then technology. The VCSE sector has quickly adapted its support offered during the COVID-19 pandemic and has much to share. This has included innovations in peer support, as well as creative approaches to socially distanced support. When there's a need for rapid change, community relationships, advocacy, and peer networks have enabled creative thinking about different types of personalised support that might be needed to support access to services. Effective innovation for inclusion works when healthcare services and communities work together to find solutions. Our interviews with innovators have highlighted that inclusive organisations co-design with people who use services, build long-lasting relationships with their beneficiaries, focus on both informal and formal support involving both peers and advocates, and give people time to build skills and confidence. People need informed and supported choice first, digital second. We know that the move to remote and digital care models in practice is challenging for many people and communities, and we're advocating for people to proactively think about inclusive innovation and design principles that enable more people to get the care that they need. So what did we do? To understand the perspective of people attempting to use services, we worked with 3 partners to carry out a listening exercise. Our partners included the Abbey Centre in central London, the Centre for Seldom Heard Voices, and Change People. They interviewed 27 people at risk of exclusion about their experiences of accessing healthcare. In Unlocking the Digital Front Door, we draw on the insight and input from our project group, who are members of National Voices covering a diverse range of health conditions and communities, who worked with us to better understand such experiences and what could be done to improve them. We worked with the Patient Experience Library and Care Opinion as well to understand the available evidence. We also carried out interviews with people working in community and voluntary sector to develop a library of interventions, innovations, and initiatives that describe their work, often in partnership with statutory services, to enable digital participation and inclusive remote support. I have to say this is not an exhaustive list, and we haven't carried out quality evaluations of these innovations. We simply meant for these to provide useful examples and case studies that can help people do things differently. We wanted to understand the barriers to good care, particularly from the perspective of people with high burdens of ill health and who are affected by inequality. Through the listening exercise, we identified the following 5 themes. 1. People understand the reason for and potential benefits of remote care. 2. Many people have struggled to access services during COVID-19. 3. People might be digitally excluded for a range of reasons. 4. People present with a range of support needs, and so one-size solutions do not fit all. 5. Poorly executed remote care negatively impacts on the experience of and quality of care. Our interviews and research demonstrated an inspiring list of innovations and initiatives. The logos on the screen are from just some of the organisations that we've included case studies from, and so I really encourage everyone to take a proper look at the report on our website, and I'll also share the link in the chat. We grouped our case studies and initiatives in relation to 3 key objectives. The first being helping people access healthcare services. The experiences people described in our listening exercises and interviews demonstrate that disseminating devices alone is not enough. Digital innovations designed to help people access healthcare online need to consider installation, connection, training matched to disparate knowledge and skill level, charging, ongoing assistance and troubleshooting support, and also co-producing with people most at risk of exclusion to ensure accessibility needs are met. An example of this is St Mungo's, who adopted a varied approach to improve the health of people experiencing homelessness by providing health information, creating health improvement networks, training staff and volunteers, providing toolkits, and promoting a range of health initiatives for staff and clients. The St Mungo's Digital Recovery College transitioned from 7 face-to-face colleges to an online service within just 10 days of lockdown. Teachers, including volunteers from technology companies, offered informal engaging courses on digital skills from beginner level to advanced sessions, as well as holistic sessions for health and well-being, including recipes, meditation, music. They also developed a course called Wonderful World of Apps, providing basic explanations for clients regardless of prior knowledge. They also gave 700 clients smartphones with about £50 worth of data and headphones to access these sessions. In addition, St Mungo's have also developed the My Smartphone, My World, a course which is available online and as a physical information booklet, helping people learn how to use their phone and connect to Wi-Fi hotspots once their data runs out. Another example of this, an innovation by BSL Health Access. In March 2020, a COVID-19 patient who was in intensive care and was deaf found that doctors and nurses were unable to communicate with him and therefore resorted to handwritten notes on coffee-stained paper. And as an emergency response to situations like this, BSL Health Access was born, and they provide free, on-demand, 24/7 interpreter services. They received more than 44,000 calls between the 16th of April and 31st of December 2021. And they help paramedics, vaccinators, pharmacists, optometrists, dentists, doctors communicate with deaf people through video relay technology. The second key objective is providing well-being support and encouraging engagement. Although research participants did point out the advantages of virtual care, for many people and in many situations, in-person care can never be replaced by phone or video. Failing to take into account context or to provide higher quality care and engagement opportunities online and offline risks excluding people from reaching out for help. The community and voluntary sector innovated in fantastic ways to develop virtual or physically distant health opportunities, as well as activities that promote well-being and build social capital more broadly. An example of this is Youth Access. Youth Access community-based members provide information, advice, and counselling to young people, and they transitioned to remote working. So they developed online and offline support programs to engage people during lockdown. And this included socially distanced walk and talks, deliveries of gardening kits, food parcels, support postcards, and they even ran art competitions, lunchtime language sessions, and Instagram pet togethers. So their informal peer support services, such as their drop-in spaces, gave a broader addition to regular counselling, and they also used platforms such as Meetup Call, allowing people to access help without spending their phone credit. The third key objective is information gathering, sharing, and health promotion. The outbreak of COVID-19 meant that accessing health information from trusted sources became more important than ever, but with many in-person healthcare services no longer available, charities and community groups looked to other methods of disseminating information especially for people without internet access. Many voluntary organisations we interviewed reported that offering consistent information through varied outlets was the best approach to preventing people slipping through the net, as different formats work for different people, and failing to provide options and translations risks excluding people from accessing information who may need it the most, thus exacerbating the inverse care law. Charities and community groups spread information using online systems, offline tools, and even in person. A brilliant example of this is from South Asian Health Action. SAHA is a patient care and community-led charity who were incredibly proactive in carrying out targeted engagement with emotional, bespoke, culturally sensitive, and language-specific support. They used volunteers, solely volunteers, and engaged with over 600 people via WhatsApp groups across the UK, and that capitalised on existing groups around faith, specific health conditions, and social groups. And in total, I think I've said this, but they've reached over 600 people. And this was brilliant in tackling misinformation, isolation, and allowed people access to information in the language that they trust and in the language that they're most comfortable in. Although not everyone has a smartphone, people in the group could share information with family and friends, and so they were able to reach people that may traditionally or typically have been digitally excluded. To conclude the Unlocking the Digital Front Door, we came up with 5 recommendations, which include making inclusion the core principle. So offering the same levels of access, consistent advice, and outcomes of care to everyone, regardless of channel. And like I've said before, one size does not fit all. Secondly, co-designing with people. No matter how urgently a new system needs to be implemented, access requirements need consideration. Focus on people who are at risk of exclusion. Third, offer supported choice and personalisation. Adapt communications, offer different formats so that people can access care and information in a way that works for them and listen to what they have to say. Fourth, support staff to innovate. Build a positive culture around testing new ways of working, put training in place, and embrace and learn from feedback. And finally, know that health is wider than healthcare. Many successful projects provide services and activities that are wider than healthcare to engage and support people, and through this, people are better able to self-care or access services. The community and voluntary sector is well positioned to innovate effectively and puts time and effort into building relationships, skills, and peer support networks. They are well placed to understand real-world community needs. In a crisis, VCSE colleagues have been able to reach out to vulnerable communities with different needs and find workable solutions at pace. However, innovations and solutions that have been developed in response to a crisis will need ongoing support. As we move towards national recovery, we will need to create a culture that embraces innovation with some key design principles at its core. We will need to explore new models of partnerships and funding for sustainability. If we exclude people digitally, people will have reduced access to care, a poor experience, and ultimately worse health outcomes. The risk of direct discrimination is high because it is highly likely that people who are digitally excluded have higher burdens of ill health and/or are less likely to be served by existing models of care. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's clear that peer-to-peer support and engagement is central to many of the innovations that we have identified. Often these successes are built on established networks and trusted relationships within communities. Effective innovation is often found at the boundary of formal service provision, and informal community-based support approaches. There is huge value in bringing people together across organisational and relational boundaries. The health system can't do this alone. Partnerships with the voluntary and community organisations that have shared their emerging practice will be crucial for the spread and adoption of these and other solutions. We need to value their understanding of the nuances and needs of their own community and build on their experiences to create innovative solutions together. Thank you. Please do feel free to ask any questions as part of the Q&A or get in touch through email or Twitter as well.
Great, thanks so much, Pavi. There's loads of food for thought there, really inspiring, and lots that I'm sure we can take energy from. Apart from anything else, I love the idea of a wonderful world of apps. It's my pleasure now to introduce Steve Duckett. Steve's going to talk about his experiences as a trustee transforming digital at the Huntingdon Disease Association. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Katherine, and pleased to be invited today to speak. I'm looking at this in a sort of wider context as well, including the whole of the HD community. And by that, I mean not just the patients, but the carers and the service providers as well. And acknowledging right at the beginning that the rarity of situation is key here. When you've got, as in many neurological conditions, not that many people around in an area, it's quite difficult to connect them anyway. And in a way, there's been a sort of positive that's come out of this that's driven us, a bit like the Parkinsons UK group, where we were already looking at what we were going to do. But I think that's accelerated. It would have been nice to have months rather than weeks to get it in place, but I'm quite pleased that the HDA, being an organisation that's agile enough to have changed that we've come out with really good outcomes. I'm going to talk principally about the HDA, but I've got a couple of other experiences of things I've been involved with, which I think are relevant to this. I'm just going to run through my thoughts on some of the activities we've done, a few on pros and cons, and then a couple of key recommendations, which fit very nicely into what Pavi's already done, because this is the stuff that's happening like at other places at the ground level. It's been a busy few months. We've got about 40 posts at the HDA covering all sorts of things like, comms, fundraising, promotion, and specialist advisors. And we've got a fairly flat management structure that makes us in a position where we can be quite agile to make those changes. And when you think, as I said, we had weeks rather than months to fundamentally change the way that we operate, then I think we did a good job. There were lots of virtual marathon runs out there, which were very encouraging. So just a few activities that we've sort of got involved with. It's come really from the top. I'm a carer, full-time carer. Life is quite tough, and I don't have an awful lot of time to spare. So actually having to be able to engage digitally has actually helped me and others in my situation to get involved in things that are important to us. So our executive meetings, for instance, now are run online. We are having a trustees weekend just to touch base with some of the new people on board, but it's been quite successful. We've been able to manage the organisation quite successfully through that forum. The charity staff themselves have had really good opportunities around internal development, lots of subjects that have been covered, and because we're, as I said, spread over the whole of England and Wales, it's not often easy to get people together in a room. So this has driven us to adopt and accept, I think, this new change. There are challenges which I'll come to later, but I'm looking at the positive side first of all. The specialist advisors have, sorry, I've lost there. The specialist advisors have adopted a new way of working. We have 21 specialist advisors spread across the country with quite large areas. So, it's been an issue about getting to places in the past. So we were already looking at that. But the 18-month trial that we've had to put in has shown us what we could and couldn't do. It would have been nice to have a little bit more time, but I think actually we've come out of this fairly successfully. So I think we will adopt now a sort of hybrid approach where there will be virtual connections across a whole range of things, but also not forgetting that face-to-face is really important. And I'll come back to that in it later. The carers group that we've got has moved nationally now. We meet on a monthly basis, and we've learned an awful lot. One of the key things I've learned is that there isn't a consistent service across the UK in terms of support through either health or welfare systems, and that's been a real eye-opener for me, and that I think has challenged us to think about how we can change and adapt to make sure we fill in some of those gaps. It's been crucial really for carers. Carers often find it difficult to get out and to get cover. So to be able to engage online with people with like-minded issues in a safe environment has been absolutely crucial, especially through the lockdown periods. The third one was a real challenge for me personally, and I think that having to be able to go on and talk to other people was a real comfort. And I think as the carers are doing such a huge job supporting the welfare and social system, it's key that they're looked after as well. And in line with that, we've been running some carers courses. There are 6 weeks courses online. So things for older carers and carers of adult children, as an example, which have been quite successful. And they're available on YouTube afterwards. So if you can't attend the meetings, you can actually go in and watch them in the comfort of your own home in your own time, which is nice. We've got a PPI group called HD Voice, which has been running virtually for quite some time, but I think this has accelerated our input now. There's about 40 of us in total there. We're able to respond very quickly to requests for assistance or gauging carers and patient views on things, and we hope to become involved in the development of the new strategy, and this last 18 months has given us a whole new insight to bring to the table. The young people are really key and often sort of overlooked because they don't sort of engage often with the traditional way that some of us have communicated in the past. And now we've set up quarterly meetings. Inner confidence with young people is often an issue. Certainly in open meetings, they might not feel comfortable to express their view and engage. And therefore using the modes which they use to communicate and to be aware of that way that changes is absolutely key. And we've got a group of people now looking at those connections to make sure that we bring those into the fold. There is a youth organisation within HD as well, which we connect with, and those people are the ones that are going to carry the burden for the future. So it's absolutely vital that they're engaged at this stage. And in terms of the wider community, we do training for professionals. 2 days of this is HD, this is what to expect, this is how you deal with it. My experience with HD is there's not many people in the medical world who know an awful lot about HD, and therefore the more that we can do to make those aware, the greater the service is going to be for the people out there. And again, they're on YouTube afterwards, so the busy professionals have got a chance to actually look at it in their own time and space. We run an accreditation scheme for care homes. HD patients can be difficult, as with many neurological conditions, and several years ago we started off this particular initiative, but of course COVID pretty much scuppered that. So what we've done recently is actually trial training care home staff for accreditation online, and we've had some good successes on that. So that's kept the momentum going, because there's a danger with all of these things that life slows up a little bit, and you lose the sort of impetus, but that's good. We have lots of branches across the country, full of very, very enthusiastic volunteers, and again, because it's a rare condition, some of those branches are quite small, and therefore the burden on volunteers is quite high. But the HD community seems to have a lot of resolve and resilience, which is especially amplified by what's happened during the lockdown stuff, because they've kept going. A bit like Katherine said, we've had tremendous support from branches and fundraising around a whole range of issues where we thought things would become quite difficult, but actually the volunteers really stood up to the plate, and as I said earlier, lots of virtual marathons running, all sorts of issues that have been done. That means that the fundraising, which is absolutely crucial to us, has been kept going. The other thing with the branches, we run branch support meetings now as well, and they have, I think personally, they've been almost better than the newsletters that we sent out, because they're interactive. So you can have a discussion around particular issues and bring together more specialist advisors, it's far easier to get a specialist to spend, say, half an hour online talking to a group rather than to travel 3 hours to a meeting and 3 hours back. So we've been quite successful in getting some really good stuff. And just a sort of example of some of the topics we've covered, amongst others: digital banking, gift aid, the Treasurer's report. I'm a treasurer at the moment and I need all the help I can get. COVID risk assessments for meetings, safeguarding, and cyber security is just a few examples. The branches themselves have had mixed, it's a mixed picture. Some branches have been able to keep digital inclusion going and have had good success. Others have not been able to do that. Personally, in Dorset, we failed to get any sort of connection. And so we took the plunge back in July and we had our first sort of meeting outdoors as a picnic. And we had 24 people turn up with 2 new families. So, it taught us a bit of a lesson, really, that, you need to think about what your community is and what your audience is, and be flexible in that approach. We also ran a pantomime and a magic show, but unfortunately they weren't particularly well attended. So again, I think lessons learned about what is and isn't there. The other thing that I think is quite key, as I keep emphasising around the rarity of the situation, is that you get niche groups. An example that we've started is something called Kim's Friends, which is for people who have tested negative. Now you would think, well, what's the issue there? But actually the guilt and the problems and the emotions that go with that, if you're living within a family and your siblings maybe are positive, is quite key. And because there are so few people around in that situation locally, there wouldn't be a critical mass. So we've been able to set something up online now, which means there's a forum now for people to discuss that, and that I hope has real benefit for the future going forward. Globally, I get involved in something called HD Cope, which is a group of patients and carers which are talking to the pharmaceutical companies developing the clinical trials. And the Roche and the Wave ones that unfortunately proved unsuccessful in February, which spent a couple of years putting together that clinical trial to make sure that people with HD were all their needs had been addressed so that they could remain engaged in that, and that's been really successful. We continued that in a digital format. Just a couple of things just outside of the HD world. Dorset Carers Reference Group has been set up. And again, that allows people like me to engage in a lot more things than I would be able to if I had to find support and time to do that. And that Carers Reference Group is having a direct influence on the commissioners in the services. So we've got a direct line in. So I think that it's been very fortunate at this time that we've been able to do that. And of course, digital inclusion is a key issue within that. And then I got a slightly different feel when I talked to our community neurological service. They trialed virtual consultations and meetings, but they've kind of made a decision now that probably with conditions with cognitive issues such as HD, they're concerned about what they're going to miss if they don't have those regular face-to-face visits. Often, as you know, with neurological conditions, there will be social and environment elements that exacerbate the condition, and you wouldn't pick that up sitting to somebody talking, as we are now. So I think there's a real concern that they don't want to miss that situation, and their concern, I think, was more about, when you go to a place, you need to make sure that the needs that are there at that time are the ones you address, not maybe the ones that you just think about. So bit of a quick rush through, but just some thoughts on pros from that. I think it's certainly focused us on different ways of working. It's acknowledged, as I've said on umpteen occasions, the rarity of the situation, which means that niche groups in local areas which may not be able to meet up are now given the opportunity to do that. It's given increased access and opportunity for patients and carers to engage in things that personal attendance would raise probably insurmountable obstacles. Who wants to go out on a wet November night, as an example? It's increased shared learning opportunities, better availability of specialist trainers, no travel involved in that. So we've been quite successful in getting some really eminent speakers at some of our meetings. We ran our family weekend, an AGM, which we normally do over 2 days in a hotel in the centre of the UK online, and we had 128 people attending that, which was quite satisfying, that people felt, you know, they were able to engage and got a lot from that with the speakers we had on board as well. The availability of different platforms means that there's a wider audience that can be engaged, and I think that's the key. Then obviously, as I spoke with the specialist advisors, time savings means that services such as the specialist service can be more efficient and effective. There's a balance, there's a hybrid that needs to be done, but there's an awful lot that we can be doing online if you do that. The use of webinars means there's a flexibility of time for people wishing to attend, who can do it in their own time. There's an opportunity as well for our specialist advisor to attend more meetings, such as the multidisciplinary teams, the clinic meetings, and family meetings where all the family may not be in the same place, which is quite key when you're dealing with something which is genetic, like HD, and has an impact across the whole of the family. And also, you can carry out more complex work over a series of meetings. One example that was given was filling out a PIP form, which can be quite intrusive and quite difficult. You know, you're laying your life out on a line there, and sometimes you just need a break. And the ability to do that online means that you can do that in several hits. So obviously, with every up, there's a down. And with cons, I think, you know, as already been mentioned, tech savviness is a real issue for us. Not everyone is able to engage using the online technology. Lack of equipment, poor or no connectivity, lack of confidence in using it are all issues to be addressed. And the other concern we have was people who don't engage with services now are unlikely to engage under through the new modes. It's often we often need to piggyback on other services and go in sort of double-handed. And getting that face-to-face one. So there's a recognition there about your audience and how you engage with that. Online meetings are interesting. You need to concentrate a lot more, I found, and they can be quite tiring. And I'm acknowledging Zoom fatigue here. So it was a novelty at first, but I mean, as you need to recognise the possible difficulties of that. And I'm not talking just about the client, I'm talking about the staff. People have said that, you know, they're running Zoom meetings one after another with no break in between, and therefore not able to give the best of services. So there's just a concern about that particular issue. And we cannot be sure about the communities that are not benefiting, because feedback is not always great. So to finish, just a couple of key recommendations coming from that. Modality is crucial. Be flexible in your approach, and different modes for different people and different situations. WhatsApp, Zoom, Google, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, telephone, drop-ins, and of course face-to-face are all relevant in the new age. Make sure that people have the right equipment, keep it as simple as possible, and train them and ensure that total support is always available. Make sure that everybody has the opportunity to engage. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Sometimes people get a platform and take over. So you need to manage some of the things that you do online. Acknowledge, as I keep saying, the rarity of the situation. It brings with it unique challenges. Be creative, be innovative. Listen to the attendees, make them part of it, not just passengers, setting their own agenda, for example, and leading that. And finally, be open-minded. Embrace the opportunities. The outcomes may surprise you. Thank you.
Fantastic, Steve. You've given us a really great holistic overview of all of how the whole world of the Huntington's Disease Association has been able to transform, and some of the benefits that come with that. A lot of resonance with our world too, but I think some specific points you've picked out really clearly. Thank you so much, Steve. Our final panelist for the morning is John Duckett. John is going to speak about the approach of the Motor Neurone Disease Association in tackling digital exclusion. John, without further ado, it's over to you.
Hello, I am John Gilles Wilkes, and I am the Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion with the Motor Neurone Disease Association. With 11.3 million people in the UK being digitally excluded for one reason or another, including low levels of literacy, and other forms of poverty, absence of or lack of familiarity with digital skills, lack of facility with the English language, it is something, alongside other forms of exclusion, that we've been giving a great deal of thought to over the last few months, and something that I have been very engaged with in previous roles, both with the association and with other organisations. It's worth remembering that at the last count, there were nearly 5 million people in the UK who never go online at all. COVID-19 had a distinct upside as far as the digital by default agenda was concerned. It enabled the NHS and others to accelerate their plans for from-a-distance services, test thinking and pilot new approaches. It had enabled us as the MND Association, in our role supporting people with and affected by MND, to enhance our offer in different ways, including through the introduction of online support and social groups for people with and affected by MND and our volunteers. This initiative resulted in more events being hosted, greater geographical coverage being provided, and an element of choice being created, participation being extended, community-specific forums being established, people who had recently been diagnosed with MND, and carers, for example. However, the approach was not without its challenges, and we needed to invest time and resources to make it work. For the most part, this involved coaching and equipping people who had not previously used virtual technology to enable them to do so, and to understand the emerging etiquette of from-a-distance engagement. A real positive was to enable carers to participate. Previously, their commitment to the person with MND had prevented or hampered them taking part in face-to-face carer support activities. Having said all of that, there were some people who could not engage or who found the experience so unsatisfactory that they would not engage. Generally, these were people who in real life would have been active participants in face-to-face activities. Moving on now to the NHS. In October 2020, following some 8 months of from-a-distance service provision, including most routine appointments for people with MND, we launched a survey amongst the MND community to determine how effective they found the approach to be. 200 plus people with and affected by MND took part, and the results in part showed that most people had the technology, space and privacy to participate in from-a-distance appointments. The removal of the need to travel was seen as a positive and significant advantage. Most, 83% appointments, took place via video, with a variety of platforms being used. Most, 73% appointments, lasted for less than 30 minutes. Some, 26%, lasted for up to 60 minutes. Most, 91% of appointments covered more than one topic. And most, 89% of participants, felt that everything that needed to be covered had been covered. Significantly, 42% of participants preferred face-to-face appointments, 33% preferred video, and 25% preferred telephone. And 27% of virtual appointments identified a need for a face-to-face appointment. The clinical outcomes during this period will, I'm sure, emerge over time, but anecdotally, concerns have been expressed that, from a distance, the subtle nuances of the condition's progression are harder to pick up. Developing individual relationships at what is a hugely challenging time for the person with MND is more difficult. An effective diagnosis of MND cannot be provided. So what does this all tell us? Digital services are seen as an acceptable alternative to face-to-face engagement in most situations and by most people, and they have the major advantage that they obviate the need for travel and parking. However, they meet some but not all needs. They have their limitations and are certainly not something with which everyone can engage. They are not seen as a universal panacea. It's highly unlikely that things will ever return to the way they were. The days of me sitting down with my GP to talk about my bad back or to get run-of-the-mill test results are long gone. Digital services, and therefore the potential for digital exclusion, are here to stay. And so what will we and what could others be doing? We're probably all very familiar with the term hybrid working, an approach that allows us or our employer to exercise choice about where and how we work, and to some extent what we do. It's unlikely that for most of us there will be an equal split between on-site and from a distance work. At some point the split will change as business decisions may need to be made about the affordability of on-site facilities. Similarly, it would be naive to think that digital and non-digital services can be provided alongside one another, or that the digital by default agenda will abate. It would also be naive to think that digital will either be an opt-in or an opt-out. It's simply part of the whole offer and something that we need to work with. From our point of view, when designing digital services or moving a non-digital service online, we're particularly mindful of the potential for digital exclusion and actively consider the extent of its impact and how it can be avoided. For the most part, we expect the solution to take the form of collective and/or individual empowerment, probably at a local level. This might involve providing grants for equipment, working with network providers to offer free or affordable data access, encouraging and helping individuals to use technology, and where all else fails, ensuring that the most vulnerable have the support that they need, regardless of the resource required. For health and social care providers, we would hope that an acceptable digital service is not one that simply has a digital access route, but one that embraces telehealth, smart technology, and the Internet of Things, to, as far as possible, replicate the clinical or support facilities and data that would be or would have been available on site. This is an interesting and challenging area, and one we look forward to being engaged with as it unfolds and starts to play out.
Thank you, John. You've really given us great food for thought there about what the extant position is and how we might look forward. And I think you've set us up really, really well for the Q&A session. So great that we've got some questions coming into the panel. We have got, by my clock, 12 minutes till the end of the session. So great timing, panelists, for bringing us all together. We'll take about 10 minutes for questions, and then I'll just wrap us up quite quickly before the end of the session. So just to kick us off, it was great to hear all three of you talking a little bit about the experiences that the people with neurological conditions have had experiencing virtual appointments, whether they're by phone or by video or whatever it might be. And I think John set that out really clearly laterally. We probably all accept that hybrid offer is here to stay. So I think my question would be great to hear from all of you. It's two parts. How can we support people to make the best of that in whatever condition they are? And how can we use our influence collectively to make sure that those experiences are optimized for people living with neurological conditions? And I wonder, John, you were the last to speak, so I think let's go in reverse. It'd be great to come to you first, if I may.
Okay, so let's take the latter part of the question first, and I think I'll hand the former part over to someone else to answer. I think there's so much we can do by learning together, by learning and working together. You know, we've come here today and we've got shared experiences. There's only three of us from a very wide sector, a very wide environment, and you know, what can we do collectively to help move this forward, to make sure that we don't leave people that's our big concern, that we leave people behind. And people with MND primarily, but it might be our volunteers and potentially our staff. And we don't want to see people being left behind. And I think there'll be experiences with bigger organizations, with smaller organizations that we can all learn from and all kind of adapt and adopt what we do. I think it would probably be unwise to say let's agree a uniform approach because we're all very different. But there are probably some principles that we could all so these are a number of things that we should all try and do in a different kind of way. I think I'll leave that one there, Katherine.
Oh, great. Pavi, and I don't know if you've got thoughts to add to that, to either part of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all approach that we could take. And that's why we've tried to come up with these recommendations that can really help organisations create inclusive and personalised solutions. So I think it's really vital that we include the end user, the patients, the community in co-designing our solutions and ensuring that they really meet the needs of the people that are using them. And sometimes the best way to do that is by using or resourcing smaller, meeting with community connectors and those smaller organisations that can really help us reach the core of those communities, which are most often digitally excluded or marginalised.
Yeah, thank you. And Steve, I think you'll be coming at it from a slightly different perspective again. What would you like to add?
Well, yeah, it's interesting to say it's the first time I've been in a forum like this, and to hear the common themes that are coming out. But even within our sort of small area within HD, we've got different challenges with different people. So each of us have got to solve different challenges at different levels. But as Pavi said, I think there is probably a piece of work here which gives us that overview of saying these are the kind of best examples, these are the kind of things you can do. And then if there are any, as has been asked, if there are any organisations out there that can help us to deal with that, then we do so, because we had an experience of using an outside organisation to promote HD. It's our 50th anniversary this year. So we had an external company came in and did a fantastic job of raising the profile of HD. So, there are people out there who can help that. But rather than us all reinventing the wheel, I think if we have a menu of things that people have tried that have been successful, I think we can all share from that. And so therefore what we probably need is that Neurological Alliance platform to be able to hold that information so that we can dip in and share it. Certainly I'll be going back with quite a lot of new ideas about what we could and couldn't do, and taking that up with the HDA.
Great, thanks, Steve. That's really, really helpful, pulling us all together yet again. Now we've got 3 really practical questions have come into the chat, so it's going to be a test of our knowledge, I think, all of us as a panel. So let's test ourselves here. So Jan Beaumont's asked, on a practical level, do we have any suggestions of national organisations that we can signpost members to for learning and support and accessing digital services? Would anyone like to come in there? I've certainly got an idea. Anyone want to come in? Don't want to put you on the spot. Well, look, I'll just come in and say, Jan, actually, we're building a relationship with a fantastic charity called AbilityNet, which actually does a load of work talking to some of the things that John talked to about, supporting people to get the right kit in place and accessing grants to do so, and about a great volunteer-led training resource. And I would really recommend that people get in touch with them. We're finding them brilliant to work with. So yeah. And then here's a great question from Angie. Angie is looking at how we fundraise to support our digital transformation. So the machinery behind websites can be expensive, but of course really help us to meet people's preferences, like the CRM systems and all the rest of it. John and Steve, I don't know, perhaps you might have experience of whether you've found it easy to attract funding to support these kind of internal transformations within your organisations. Pavi, you might want to come into. So I think these are value for money, these kind of investments.
It is quite a hard thing to fundraise for, but there are deals to be done with providers. There are providers who like to be associated with the third sector. But to actually go out and say, help us buy our CRM system, it's not a particularly attractive ask of fundraising. We have been working quite closely with a number of significant players in the innovation and IT market. It hasn't produced anything specific, but it's helping around thinking more than anything. So in answer to your question, no, I haven't got any good ideas on that one, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Steve, I don't know if Huntingdons have got any experience to share there.
Yeah, we have a third party IT company that we've been working with for many years to develop sort of websites and stuff. So, but the funding then has really come from sort of within our own. Although there are opportunities, we're currently investigating working with the pharmaceutical companies to look at things like access to HD services across the UK. So there are opportunities out there, I think, if presented in the right way, especially in the current climate. This is, for me, opened up a whole new vista of things maybe we weren't sort of thinking about asking for before. We're brave. Now you've got really no choice. We've got to go down this route. We've got to sort of start doing this, and I suspect a lot of charities will be gearing themselves up to look at to address the issues we've all raised. Because also it's opened up that problem of who aren't we engaging with, that maybe this gives us an opportunity to look at even more. So I think it's just about being a little bit, maybe a little bit pushy, and seeing what we can find. But I think, again, if we got some sort of collective push going together, then there are going to be issues around, maybe some charities gathering together to look at the ways that we can sort of resolve that particular issue rather than individually going for it. There might be something a little bit on a bigger side.
Yeah, and actually, Pavi, I don't know if you have any sort of relevant experience to bring in to this. I think the National Voice is a slightly different kind of organisation, obviously, but I don't know, do come in if you...
Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't comment on how easy it is to externally fund, but I would definitely encourage everyone to have a look at Unlocking the Digital Front Door, because we have so many examples in there, practical, real life things that other colleagues in the VCSE sector have done, and some of them do speak towards things like that. So definitely have a look, and we can always help connect you with those organisations so we can have chats and learn from each other.
Yeah, great, Pavi. And I think for me, I'll come in and say, we actually have been quite fortunate in that world. And I think it was partly because we were already building our big Parkinson's Connect project. And I think what's been the sell for us is that as ever, it's come back to, it's been the voice of people with Parkinson's at the guts of that work, and then being able to say to funders, but look, we need the mechanics to support us. So it's helped us. But I think, yeah, a lot of work to do in the area. Time is rapidly running out. Sue Millman's asked if anyone's being aware of protocols and procedures being established within the NHS to assess when appointments should be virtual and make arrangements for them to be properly supported. From my experience, Sue, thus far, it's all going a bit local. It seems to be different protocols developing in different places. And really quickly, I don't know if others on the panel have comments to make on that. John, if I just come to you, perhaps.
Yeah, I would simply say I think the NHS digital by default agenda is moving forward at juggernaut speed.
Yeah, that's a great place. I think that's a great place to stop. I am going to round us up. I was going to ask the panel, what's been the most surprising innovation that you've heard about in the time that we've had? But I think I'm just going to have to leave that thought for now. But I think for me, I have heard so much of the development of fantastically good practice, but at the heart of everything, what I have heard is that hunger for all of us not to leave anybody behind. So that's really come through loud and clear. And I think the other thing that comes through loud and clear is that the forum, like the Neurological Alliance, like National Voices, where we can bring our voices and expertise together to build for the future and to build these kind of communities of interest, communities of expertise. Digital working virtually brings us some huge opportunities. So I'm going to finish there by thanking all of our panelists for sharing their experiences so honestly and openly. I'm going to recommend the National Voices to you all, Unlocking the Digital Front Door. I know we've been using it a lot at Parkinson's UK, and I'm looking forward to continuing to build our links with the MNDA, with Huntingdon's, and with all of you in this community. So thank you all for your time this morning, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of NeuroFest. Looking forward to being a visitor to the next session. Thank you all.
and I could hear you. Oh, it's dreadful. Hello. Can you hear me? Good. In that case, you can switch me off. Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Amanda Swain. I'm a trustee of the Neurological Alliance. This is, I think, one of the first times that we brought the neurological and the LGBTQIA+ community together. About time too, eh? To discuss shared experiences and what we know about being in that community and living with the neurological condition. Of course, what unites members of the Neurological Alliance is that we want to improve treatment, care and support for everyone with the neurological condition. Importantly, we want to see improvements for everyone, regardless of gender, sexuality, sex, relationships. Everyone means all. But that means we need to have a far greater understanding of what it means to be in the LGBTQIA+ community and live with a neurological condition. Stonewall's LGBT report in the UK, published in 2018, found that, here's some stats for you, 52% of LGBT people said they had experienced depression in the last year. 46% of trans people had thought about taking their own life in the last year. 31% of LGBT people who aren't trans said the same. 13% of LGBT people have experienced some form of unequal treatment from their healthcare staff. That's terrible because they are LGBT. 5% of LGBT people have been pressured to access services to question or change their sexual orientation when accessing healthcare services. 19% of LGBT people aren't out to any healthcare professional about their sexual orientation when seeking general medical care. This number rises to 40% of bi men and 29% of bi women. Yes, they do ask that question, don't they? 14% of LGBT people have avoided treatment, and this really is concerning, for fear of discrimination because they are LGBT. We know that if you live with a neurological condition, getting the right treatment at the right time is paramount. Delay to accessing that support can have a huge impact on quality of life, as demonstrated by those statistics. And to think that may be in part due to fear or distrust in health services is incredibly frustrating and worrying, and absolutely has to change. With that in mind, I am pleased to be joined today by our fantastic panel, who will explore some of these issues in greater detail. Hopefully, we'll come away from this event with further ideas about how our organisations can celebrate and support LGBTQIA+ people and demonstrate allyship. So first of all, we're going to hear from Vicky Jane. Vicky Jane Gooding is a member of the LGBTQ and a woman with a transgender history who has recent diagnosis of functional neurological disorder, that's FND in short, so I can say it better. Vicky Jane is also a trustee and volunteer for Mind Out, an LGBTQ mental health charity, and Vicky is currently involved in giving online support to LGBTQ people with mental health issues, and in the past has been involved in peer support groups and one-to-one support. We will also hear from Dr. Kit Wu. Doctor is a consultant neurologist at King's College Hospital with special interests in movement disorders and healthcare leadership. She graduated from Nottingham University Medical School and was awarded a PhD in clinical neurosciences by Imperial College London for her research in Parkinson's disease. Recently, Dr. Wu has been working with us at the Neurological Alliance to conduct a focused literature review on what we know about the relationship between neurological conditions and gender, sex and sexuality and relationships. She will share some of her findings with us today. And finally, we will hear from Eloise Dunborough from Stonewall. Eloise leads Stonewall's policy and research teams to deliver our campaign priorities, such as ending conversion therapy, improving provision for LGBTQ+ inclusive healthcare, tackling hate crime and hate speech, protecting LGBTQ+ asylum seekers and refugees, and ensuring all LGBTQ+ people have legal identity documents. So, thank you again for joining us. And it gives me a real pleasure to go first to Vicky Jane, who's going to speak about her experiences. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Vicky Jane, and I'm a woman with a transgender history, so commonly known as a trans woman, I guess, for shortcuts. I'm 57, married for 35 years, been a carer for all of that time. My partner is a wheelchair user. And I've, within the last sort of 6 months, been diagnosed with FND, functional neurological disorder. And there's usually a block on those words in my head, so I'm really surprised that my brain let me say that. And I'm here to talk about my experience, and this is very much my experience of healthcare services as somebody who's LGBT and somebody who's now accessing neurological services. I guess what I want to emphasize is that when I came out as transgender, I very quickly realized that I joined a minority, and I'd never really been in a minority before. So I didn't know what that felt like. And when you're in a minority that's in the headlines and feels like it's constantly under attack, it brings about something called minority stress, which is something also I'd never experienced before. And that has a knock-on effect on your mental health and all other things. But I want to go back to 6 years ago when I first came out to my family and received incredibly wonderful support from them. But then I had to approach the health service because I needed to be treated for gender dysphoria, which was something that I really did suffer from. And I want to give you an idea of what it's like as an LGBT person approaching a doctor for the first time, and the concerns and the worries that are around that. And I came out at a time when generally the UK was very trans accepting and very LGBT accepting, which it's not quite so now. My first doctor, I got referred across to a gender identity clinic up in Daventry. And they wrote apparently to my doctor, and I didn't hear anything for months, apart from to say that I'd got an appointment coming up in the November and they looked forward to seeing me. And then got closer to the time and they wrote to me and said, actually, you don't have an appointment. We haven't heard from your doctor. I was a bit stunned, really, because I just assumed that, you know, everything was working fine. And I got a letter from my doctor a few days later, basically saying that she was refusing to enter into a joint care agreement with the gender identity clinic. I was pretty upset, to be honest. In fact, I was mortified. And I didn't know what to do about it. It felt like all of my options had been cut off immediately. And I went to see her, and she was incredibly defensive. And when I said, how can you refuse me the care that I need? She just said, it's my reputation. And I won't enter into prescribing hormones. I won't enter into any kind of transgender care. And I was really shocked, but I figured, well, I can go to another doctor. But she assured me that she'd been to the CCG, and they assured me that no doctor locally would treat me. Luckily, they were wrong, and I found a local doctor to me who I knew was friendly to transgender people and actually a member of the LGBT community. And I think that made a big difference to me. I could go and talk to a doctor who was a part of this minority, who was a part of this community. And I've been with that doctor for the last 6 years, and she's a truly wonderful person. But I think what that emphasised to me straight up was that transgender care was very much on a person-by-person basis, in that you could meet a nurse who wasn't transgender supportive, as I did, possibly by mistake, walked into the waiting room and used my old name, my previous name, before me coming out as transgender, and in fact almost came into my face saying my previous name, to my horror, in front of the other people in the waiting room. And I sat there absolutely mortified until eventually I followed her into the dressing room, announcing to everybody in the room that I was obviously transgender. And we sorted that out, and the surgery really apologetic, and it shouldn't have happened, and it was records, and it was this, and it was that. But it just emphasised to me very much that every transaction you have with somebody in healthcare is possibly going to go horribly, horribly wrong. And we see that for other people. My biggest nightmare would be to have a seizure and end up in hospital, and somebody then have to decide, as a transgender person, are you going on a male, a female, or a mixed ward, and then that would just be down to whoever you're dealing with at the time and local policies, and it feels dangerous. And I guess as a trans person, what I'm trying to say is that when you go into healthcare, you're very much you're in somebody else's power. You as a human being are handing over a tremendous amount of power and trust to other people. And as a transgender person, as an LGBT person, people have beliefs about us, and sometimes those beliefs get enacted in the way that you're treated. Do trans and LGBT people, but specifically trans people, trust health services? No, not really. The gender identity clinic service, I met a trans person earlier today who said that they've just been referred to a transgender clinic, and that clinic is currently seeing people that were referred to them in 2017. 2017. So this person is going to wait 5 years at least before they're seen by gender services. So when I was referred to neurological services by my GP, obviously all of those worries and concerns about how I would be dealt with as a transgender person came back to the fore, and the fact that I was putting myself in somebody else's hands came back again. My concerns were that people would want to stop my treatment that I get for being transgender, my hormone therapies, that people would want to hear my whole story again. And one of the most damaging things about being transgender is this constantly having to repeat your story and all the trauma that you've been through in your life because you were transgender. And it's so deeply damaging, but it's something when you go through that system, you do eternally. So those were my concerns, and my concerns every time that I'm referred to a new department. I'm with St George's, and I've been for a neurologist, neuropsychiatrist, and waiting to be referred on now. So everybody that I meet, I'm repeating my story. But what I have found is that I don't need to repeat that story with an emphasis on my transgender past. And I've actually been really pleased and impressed with the way that I've been treated. So what could have alleviated my concerns before I came into this service? And it's silly things. It's things like knowing that the person that I'm going to be talking to is going to see me as a woman and as a person, and not as somebody who is transgender. So that's it. I'm transgender. It's not the most interesting thing about me. The thing that we need to concentrate on is my functional neurological disorder, which means I can't drive, I have seizures, sometimes I can't speak, I lose control of my body, sometimes I can't walk. All of these things that have really impacted my life and really now need resolving. So I've been really pleased, but things like putting your pronouns. My pronouns are she, her. So I'm Vicky Jane Gooding and my pronouns are she, her. Putting your pronouns in your emails or asking somebody what their pronouns are is just such a sign of allyship that means that you understand. The new Progress Pride flag is really important because that's the old Pride flag and includes the transgender flag. So that's really important to see that. Role models who are transgender talking about mental health and their interaction with neurological services would make it easier for us to approach neurological services. I'm also a trustee of a group called Mind Out, which is an LGBTQ-led service that deals with mental health for people within the LGBT community. And that was set up by the community for the community. And that's really important as well, is to have a situation where we can support ourselves, where we don't have to explain every time that we're LGBT. We're talking to people who know how it feels to be a part of minorities. So when I went to my new GP, she was a part of the LGBT community. I didn't need to go back to the beginning and explain all of that. So I think there's just a few things to think about there. I think the important thing that I want to get over to you is that most of the LGBT community do not trust the establishment. The establishment is seen as being against us, and especially at the moment. And I think that needs to be broken down by small things, such as the pronouns, such as flags, such as reaching out to those communities specifically, because we've got exactly the same mental health problems, more mental health problems, because of the way that society portrays us and the way that, you know, currently we're being attacked within the press. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to me, and thank you to FND Hope who invited me to speak today. And I hope this has helped you to understand how I and the LGBT community feel about health services. And thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Vicky Jane. That was excellent. I have to say, really enlightening some very important points that we will hopefully be bringing up later in discussion in the Q&A session. But now what I'd like to do is introduce you to Dr. Kit Wu. As I say, she's going to share with us. She's going to share with us her findings on her review. Thank you, Kit.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present some data to you on equity, diversity and inclusion for patients with neurological diagnoses. This work has been done in collaboration with the Neurological Alliance, the Association of British Neurologists, and the South London Neurosciences Operational Delivery Network. Just a quick introduction about myself. I am a consultant neurologist. I work at King's College Hospital. I have a special interest in general neurology and in movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease. Many early experiences have shaped me to highlight the importance of equity and diversity in access to healthcare. In the community, I help with a project which helped to improve access to healthcare for British Chinese individuals. And in a hospital, I have done several projects on improving information and access to those who have language barriers. And currently, we're working with a project with Neurological Alliance and the South London Operational Delivery Network. We're conducting a literature review in the hope of improving the equity and access to neurosciences care across the board. But also, furthermore, there are work also ongoing for improvement of clinical pathways and a Public Health England project on the audit of equity of access to neurosciences care in South London. In particular, today, I'm going to talk to you about the equity and diversity literature review with Neurological Alliance. In terms of background, neurological conditions are very common. In the Get It Right First Time report, it documented many unwanted variation within care of neurosciences conditions. Black and minority ethnic patients are less likely to be satisfied with their care. This is well documented in many in many proposals, as well as in the evidence-based medicine and literature reviews. And more recently, Neurological Alliance patient reports performed in 2020 show that only 4% of respondents from their patient experience survey were from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and of those, 34% reported that they did not have a care plan, compared to 27% of the whole cohort. So our question that we wanted to find out was, how does social demographic factors influence care in patients with neurological diagnoses? The aim of the project was to describe the relationship between social demographic factors and the epidemiology, clinical factors, diagnosis, treatment, and patient experience and outcomes. And in doing so, in getting the information, we would like to identify potential gaps in the research where further work may be done to explore these relationships and ultimately to benefit patient care. How did we go about doing this? So around April this year, Georgina from Neurological Alliance had this idea that we would like to understand more about this topic, and she started getting a team together. It consists of myself and Dr. Rani Nakunan from the Association of British Neurologists, as well as James Mitchell, who is a PhD student who looked at epilepsy and equality, and has a vested interest in this topic, as well as a penultimate year medical student called Miss Misha Vidot. We started by identifying the equality and diversity factors, which are part of the Equality Act 2010 protected characteristics. And these include age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. And following this, we identified the conditions that we would like to look at. It made logical sense to look at the 10 most commonly found neurological conditions. And we identified these 10 conditions from 2 large studies within the last 20 years. And these conditions include stroke, epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, functional neurological diagnosis, migraine, dementia, traumatic brain injury, motor neurone disease, and brain tumors. We looked at all the published literature in the scientific literature between 2000 and 2021, with a specific focus of evidence between socioeconomic, social demographic factors and different aspects of a particular neurological condition that we were looking at. And we included studies which had human participants and were published in the English language. We reviewed all the evidence, but evidence from UK were prioritized so that we can publish information that are relevant to our audience and to our project. In terms of progress, it started in April 2021. The conceptual development of the project started in May 2021, and since then we had held fortnightly meetings to discuss. In between, we had the literature review was ongoing. And so far, we have completed the initial review on all 10 conditions, as well as the second draft reviews, which we're finalizing. In terms of key findings, and particularly in relation to sexuality, gender, and gender reassignment, there are several main points I would like to mention. First of all, there are very little information compared to other protected characteristics. And that information regarding sexuality, gender, and gender reassignment are specific to the condition mentioned. So, for example, conditions affecting younger populations, such as multiple sclerosis and epilepsy, have more evidence compared to those affecting the elderly population, such as stroke and Parkinson's. And for newer diagnosis, newer conditions, such as functional neurological disorder, have less evidence than more established conditions like epilepsy. So in the next couple of slides, I would just like to present to you some key findings about those who have more information, such as multiple sclerosis and epilepsy. In terms of multiple sclerosis, it is well established that the condition is more common in those who are born female. And in terms of sexuality, two particular studies really stood out. The first is a collaborative study with an MS Society, where a researcher interviewed 28 patients with multiple sclerosis who identify themselves as LGBTQ. They documented perceived invisibility of LGBTQ persons within MS, and in particularly, and I quote, that they felt themselves as a minority within a minority. There were also many examples where there were lack of discussion about their disability, about the chronic illness, and about MS as a condition with an LGBT context. The second study is that of an Italian study in 2017, where they documented non-heterosexual MS patients. They were less likely to access psychological services compared to those who identify as heterosexual. And the study suggested that attitudes towards LGBTQ patients with MS might affect resource utilization, and that patients with LGBTQ were less likely to be able to access, and hence documenting an inequality of access to healthcare. In terms of gender reassignment, a large US review study identified that those who identify themselves as transgender, they do not report differences in healthcare utilization, including emergency department visits, hospital admissions, or disease-modifying therapy used compared to the general population. In the UK study in 2015, it was a population study of people undergoing gender transformation procedures who then later develop MS. The researchers found a strong positive association of MS in males undergoing sexual transformation, and they postulated that it might be due to potential low testosterone levels as an MS risk factor in population. So those were a couple of highlights from the MS literature review. Now moving on to epilepsy. In terms of gender, the incidence and prevalence of epilepsy is slightly higher in men. And this is well documented, not in just one study, but in many. However, there were overall no gender differences found between men and women in the incidence of epilepsy, bearing in mind that there are many types of epilepsy, and this was an umbrella term we used for the literature search. Unfortunately, for sexual orientation, there were no data, no evidence in published literature demonstrating an association between sexual orientation and epilepsy. In terms of gender reassignment, a US study found that the estimated transgender population worldwide with epilepsy was roughly to be between 150,000 and 450,000. And the other point that they mentioned was that many anti-epileptic drugs have potential interactions with hormone treatments. And so therapeutic adjustment to medication, gender-affirming medication, as well as to anti-epileptics will need to be individualized. However, further research needs to be done in this area. In terms of recommendation, it is important that we provide further support to our LGBTQ community. Examples of how this could be applied include ensuring that additional layers of complexity should be taken into account in managing a neurological condition. Care should be individualized as a result, and that more information should be produced and provided for our LGBTQ community so that we can raise awareness to support their individual needs. In addition to this, further research needs to be conducted in all areas concerning gender, sexuality, and gender reassignment so that further gaps can be identified. So research can be done to help our LGBTQ community as well as to improve our understanding of how conditions affect particular neurological conditions in these group of patients. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Kit, for that presentation. Lots of information on that. And again, we're going to come back to any questions for the panel after the next presentation. And just as a reminder, that is from Eloise Stomborough from Stonewall. Thank you very much, Eloise.
My name is Eloise Stomborough. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Associate Director of Policy and Research at Stonewall. We are Europe's largest LGBTQ+ rights organisation. At Stonewall, we imagine a world where all LGBTQ+ people are free to be themselves, are treated equitably, and can live their lives to the full. We were founded in 1989 in response to Section 28, which was a piece of legislation that banned the promotion of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. And now, over 30 years later, we work in each nation of the UK and have established partnerships across the globe. Stonewall's campaigning work drives positive change in public attitudes and public policy and helps to transform the day-to-day experience of all LGBTQ+ people. In particular, we commission and conduct new research and make the best use of the existing data on LGBTQ+ people, and we listen to and involve LGBTQ+ communities in research about their lives and work alongside community organisations like the organisations here today to learn more about the issues affecting them, such as those for LGBTQ+ people who are living with neurological conditions. Over the last 30 years, we have helped to create transformative change in the lives of LGBTQ+ people across communities in the UK. And our new Free to Be strategy sets out that we will campaign for accessible and high quality healthcare for all LGBTQ+ people. And I'm delighted to be here to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Stonewall has committed to work to improve health outcomes for all LGBTQ+ people. And that includes ensuring that LGBTQ+ people have access to high quality and timely healthcare that recognise their particular needs and the needs of the identities that they have alongside their identities as LGBTQ+ people. Unfortunately, there isn't enough data out there in the UK on the experiences of LGBTQ+ people who are living with neurological conditions. But one thing we do know from the recent NHS digital analysis of the Health Survey England data that was between 2011 and 2018 is that 26% of LGB adults, they didn't report out on trans people, and we're working very closely with them to ensure that the next data set does. 26% of LGB adults reported a limiting long-standing illness that was compared to 22% of heterosexual adults. And as I said, there isn't data on neurological conditions specifically, but 16% of LGB adults reported living with long-term mental, behavioural or neurodevelopmental disorders compared with only 6% of heterosexual adults. So it's unsurprising then, considering these significantly higher rates of poor health outcomes and life-limiting long-term conditions, that LGB adults consistently report lower average mental well-being scores than their heterosexual peers. And we know that this is very much true of all LGBTQ+ people, including trans people, non-binary people, and the broader LGBTQ+ spectrum. Alongside the higher prevalence of these long-term conditions, our 2018 LGBT in Britain health report found that LGBTQ+ people experience significant barriers in accessing appropriate and timely healthcare. We found that 1 in 8 LGBT people, so that was 13%, had experienced unequal treatment from healthcare staffs because they were LGBTQ, and 1 in 7 LGBT people have avoided pursuing treatment for fear of discrimination, which is very significant numbers. And I think that's something I'll come to later in how we can improve the experiences of LGBTQ+ people with neurological conditions. Stonewall will continue to work to make sure that all healthcare settings provide high quality, accessible and inclusive care for all LGBTQ+ people. And this will include working with the NHS to better monitor sexual orientation and gender identity across healthcare settings, particularly, as I mentioned before, improving the data that we have on health outcomes among trans people. We don't currently consistently monitor gender identity in any context, and this means that we have really limited understanding of the impacts on trans people of a variety of conditions, including living with long-term neurological conditions. Stonewall are also working in partnership with other LGBTQ+ organisations on the National Rainbow Badges scheme, which is working to benchmark NHS trust for LGBTQ+ inclusion and to make sure that everyone feels safe to access healthcare in the NHS if they're LGBTQ+. And I also want to say that we are looking forward to working much more closely in the future with partner organisations like yourselves to improve our evidence base on the experiences of LGBTQ+ people living with neurological conditions. So what support is available from Stonewall for people who both live with neurological conditions and charities who work closely with them? Well, Stonewall are primarily a lobbying campaigning organisation. We don't do direct service provision, but we do have an info service. So if people want to get in touch with us, who have questions they would like to ask, we can absolutely signpost people directly to organisations and charities that work more closely with individuals, such as the LGBT Foundation or LGBT Switchboard, both of whom have significant healthcare expertise. However, for the charities and service providers who work with people who are living with neurological conditions, Stonewall are always happy to discuss how we can best support you to understand and to address the needs of LGBTQ+ communities. And if we're not best placed to answer that question, we can almost certainly direct you to someone who is. We are very lucky to be well connected within the sector to understand where areas of expertise might lie. So, for instance, our colleagues at Opening Doors, who work with LGBTQ+ elders, are often very well equipped to understand some of the long-term health impacts that those communities face. And we can also share information, briefing, and updates on the health issues that face LGBTQ+ communities. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about our key recommendations to healthcare professionals, to the research community, and to charities to make sure that their work centres the experiences of LGBTQ+ people who are living with a neurological condition. I think, firstly, it can be easy to assume that, like people assume by people who live with neurological conditions, that there is one LGBTQ+ community or one set of needs that the community shares. And that's just not the case. There is nothing can replace a person-centered approach, and one that recognizes that people will come into your service or your care with multiple intersecting identities, and that will inform what they need from your service. So I think it is helpful to understand the specific needs of our community, but also to recognize that something that might serve one person will not necessarily serve another. And that means that the best way to understand what people need is just to ask them. If you center the experiences of those who use your service, the LGBTQ+ people, or people with all minoritized experiences, ask them what they need and they'll tell you. They will have the best understanding of their needs, and it means that you can get really specific feedback about what is working and what isn't, that will never, we can't replace that kind of lived experience and insight. And this absolutely includes your staff, your partners, your stakeholders, any consultants you work with. If you can support a diverse workforce, you can help build an inclusive environment from the ground up. And you can also get the insight from people who know what you do inside and out. So we would always recommend to start with developing internal HR policies that are inclusive, and then to seek training on providing an LGBTQ+ inclusive healthcare environment. As I mentioned before, that's a significant challenge for many LGBTQ+ people who are facing trying to receive treatment, who then find that they experience barriers to care. And finally, it's really important to invest in the monitoring and data analytics that can reveal the hidden inequalities and barriers that LGBTQ+ people experience. As I mentioned before, there is a lack of understanding about why LGBTQ+ people often have poorer health outcomes or higher rates of living with long-term illnesses. And until we can understand those needs better, it is hard to design services that serve their specific needs. So I would always recommend, if you're interested in doing research into this area, to reach out to organizations like Stonewall or others who have extensive expertise in how best to design inclusive, affirming, and accurate research into the needs of LGBTQ+ people. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you will find some of this useful, and do get in touch if you have any further questions or if you would like to engage with us further on how we can support the work that you do.
Thank you very much, Eloise. So I'm just going to do a short summary, and then hopefully you've got plenty of questions for us. Okay, so first of all, I think Vicky was excellent in giving a personal description of how it feels like to be in a minority. And I think an excellent explanation of that fear and stress, which then other speakers have gone on to say just isn't good for your mental health and your well-being. So I think that's an area that we need to approach. And and I think it's already in the question box actually, how we can ensure that the workforce is educated, informed, and understands the needs of the individuals. Now, as a clinician myself, when I have somebody come in, I listen to the individual. So for me, I'm a little bit flummoxed that people don't actually pay attention to the individual just as a person. So you'll have to forgive me for the shock on that one. Some of the things were a little bit naughty, like the GP gatekeeping. What can we do about that? I'm really pleased with the research that Kit talked about, and not surprised about the dissatisfaction from the BAME community. Really pleased that the Equality Act is involved in the research, and that I think ties in really well with what Eloise was saying, in that actually, therefore, perhaps NHS trusts and staff should be benchmarked for their diversity and their inclusiveness. Okay, so also I think very importantly, at least we know from today where we can find support from, even if it's being signposted from Stonewall. And I think we've got here our first question. Kit and Amanda, that's us two. Okay, do we think that there is more work that we could do to support healthcare professionals to demonstrate allyship and recruit a more inclusive workforce? Kit, you may go first.
Firstly, absolutely, I think we need to do more and much more to support healthcare professionals and to demonstrate allyship. In the organisation I work in, which is King's College Hospital, we already have a very good diversity in our workforce, which closely matches that of our community. We have a specific department, which is Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, and a lead which sits on the governance and corporate board of the hospital. So from top down, this is already a very high priority in terms of King's values. In addition to this, and filtering down to specific departments, I would really like to see more community representative in this situation. For example, perhaps Eloise and Stonewall could come and talk to us and approach specific departments, and that could be done through our EDI department, through the EDI lead, would be very happy to talk to different organizations concerning this. Not only that, I would also like to highlight that in specific neurological conditions, it's very difficult, I think, for clinicians, despite the wish or the desire to help patients who are LGBTQ, because it's a bit of an invisible issue, isn't it? I think I would then also encourage patients who are part of the LGBT community to come forward and to be more vocal about it, so that we can specifically direct concerns and produce a very personalized and tailored care for the individual.
I agree that we had the first EDI discussion last year in NeuroFest actually, and one of the things that we really learned from that, again, it wasn't really surprised. It's not rocket science. Is to actually have a diverse workforce, somebody who represents the community, that they need to represent and talk about and inform. And I think if you've got a diverse workforce, then absolutely you're going to be able to hit that benchmark that Eloise was talking about earlier. I do know that when you have a CQC inspection of your services, and particularly for what's it called, the quality improvement framework, you are asked about the diversity and what you're doing to support different groups within, who attend as patients, for example, and your staff. So I'm not sure that they're perhaps asking that question of all perhaps thoroughly and get the right responses on that one. So we've got another question. Can I ask a question before I go to the next one, which is I don't think that although there is a question on the medical records, anytime that I see a patient's notes, etc., is there is very rarely, unless somebody is heterosexual, have they actually answered the questions on sexuality and gender. And I wonder, is that because of this fear and the stress that it causes by health professions approach? Has anybody got any comments on that? Is it a good question to have, or should we just take it off the notes?
I might to jump in here. I think that there is a huge challenge with ensuring that people feel confident sharing this information if they perceive that they will be discriminated against or that their treatment will be less good. If they reveal that they have a minority sexual orientation or gender identity, of course they're not going to put that information out there. We also know that those in the LGBTQ+ community have experienced, a long history of discrimination in medical settings, and have, I think, very good reason to be concerned about that treatment. However, from my perspective, it is absolutely crucial to have this information and to do everything we can to make sure that it is as comprehensive and as accurate as possible, because the saying remains true, which is we can't, if you don't count us, we don't count. We don't know our needs if we're not able to track them. And I think in many contexts, the poor treatment is due to lack of understanding, and the lack of understanding is because it's not understood to be a significant proportion of your of those who use your services. If people recognised how many LGBTQ+ people were using their services, they might be able to make the case to invest in training and education and research that would improve the care that our communities need.
Absolutely. Very good. Oh, sorry, Kit and Georgina. Georgina, would you like to go first?
Thank you. I guess I totally agree with what Eloise was just saying. The only thing I would add to that is that we ask quite a lot of people with neurological conditions, and on quite a constant basis, ourselves included at the Alliance. We're just doing a massive patient experience survey at the moment, and lots of our members are doing a similar sort of thing. Which, if people are giving up that information and feel that they're able to, they also need confidence that it's being used appropriately and it is influencing change in practice and policy, all of that sort of stuff. So the feedback loop is actually really, really important. And one thing I think that we don't always get right as a community, really. So that's an area that I'd like to see improved.
Okay, and Kit, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for the comment, Eloise. I think it's really useful to know, but I just also want to mention that in all our mandatory training for all the health hospital staff, LGBTQ is actually a module in mandatory training, so everyone who works in the hospital has to go through it. So I would like to encourage you and everyone else not to be afraid to come forward, because it does, as we know, affect the treatment that you receive. So the more we know about it, the more we can help you with.
Okay, so I think that's possibly something that we need to action actually and take forward. We need to find a plan of how to do it, a strategy perhaps to ensure that people feel safe. Although from the talks that we've had, I can quite understand why they don't feel safe. There's perhaps, I don't think Kit and myself are in the minority, but I'm beginning to think there's not enough of us. Okay, so we've got a question in the chat box here. How can we ensure a renewed focus on health inequalities has a meaningful positive impact on access and experience for those with protected characteristics? Eloise, I'm coming to you on this because I think you're going to be the expert.
I thank you for the confidence. I think this is an opportunity. I think we have an opportunity at the moment where public understanding of health inequalities and disproportionate impacts of something like the COVID pandemic on already marginalized groups is, I think, it's far greater understanding of that we are not all experiencing the same challenges at the same time. My recommendation or my thinking would be that we don't use that as an opportunity to flatten experiences, that there is no one experience. And I think that if we can use this energy to understand both where things are not working on a grand scale and on a macro scale, but also to understand how that might impact people differently depending on what marginalised identities they hold, what protected characteristics, and particularly how those might intersect. I think that's how we try to address that. And I think, as Georgina was saying, make sure that the feedback loop is really robust. People know that their energy and their effort will produce positive change, and their engagement will produce positive change. So that it's not just, we want to talk about how things are worse for you and then nothing else happens after that.
Do you think perhaps one of the organisations that we ought to be just prodding a bit and asking for a bit more information about how they addressed how they treat different people would be the Royal College of GPs? Might be somewhere to have a little start, considering they are the gatekeepers. Yes,
certainly, and I think that there are a number of those governing bodies, regulatory bodies that hold a huge amount of power and influence. I think there's been a certain spread in enthusiasm and engagement with understanding the differing experience and how to provide positive and inclusive care to those with protected characteristics. I think also to keep challenging government decision makers to be doing robust equality impact assessments. One of the things that we've seen from the COVID pandemic is that there's often a claim that there is no evidence of disproportionate impact on LGBTQ+ people. And what that is heard to mean is there is no disproportionate impact. And what is actually true is they've done no research into it, so they don't know. And I think that we just keep pushing to get the research, to get the insights, so that we can understand what the impacts might be.
I agree. So there's another question up on here. Is there any advice for smaller VCSE organisations as they try and provide more personalised information and support? So that's the voluntary sector. Is there any advice for the smaller organisations there so that they can try and help with the personalised support?
I guess
Georgina.
all I was just going to say from our perspective is, I think discussions like this are really, really important and need to continue. And there's, I'm aware that lots of our members, for example, are, I guess, grappling with how they can demonstrate and really work through their commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion, but really struggle because of resourcing. To be frank, in talking about kind of organisations that are run by kind of one volunteer, it can be really, really difficult. And I think so. Discussions like this, collaboration is really important. There's lots I think we can learn from one another. There's perhaps more we can do to kind of reduce duplication of effort as well, across the sector. And I guess other things like working with organisations like Stonewall to kind of learn what you can do in a bit more detail and think about kind of what best practice might be in this area. Okay, yes, thank you very much. Kit, I have another question for you, and that is research. And Eloise just talked about it as well. So research into this, Public Health England, except for they're not called that now, but the data networks, NIN, etc., don't particularly collect or push to collect data on medication and treatments differential between women and men, never mind anything else, anything else. Unfortunately, being just a woman doesn't give you a protected characteristic, but actually from a research point of view, I feel it should. We discovering that medicine, crash dummies for cars and everything else are just based purely on men, is quite shocking. So, oh, good. Hi, Vicky Jane. Yes. So,
hi there. Sorry, I didn't join you earlier.
That's okay. So, on the research front, what do you think we can promote, Kit?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a really interesting question. So first of all, Public Health England, the information they collect is actually from audit data and data collected from hospitals pulled together, which then subsequently get reviewed through statistical analysis. I think research on this area should be more of a prospective, tailored approach by the individual researchers who needs to be attuned to protected characteristics. For example, we have the PhD student that we work with on this literature review is very much so. There's just not enough of them at the moment. I think with the promotion, with the greater awareness of LGBTQ, this will come in time. It is very true. There is great differences in terms of treatments specifically tailored to females and males, and that can be looked into further detail. So that would be something that I would actually take up with Public Health England. Actually, we're doing an audit with them for clinical pathways into neurological conditions. So thank you very much. The other thing I would like to also mention in the earlier question is about the smaller charities. They could do a lot for individual patients, because we as health professionals want to know how LGBTQ in the context affect an individual patient. It's all about individual treatment plans and tailored care pathways. So by further understanding, perhaps, for example, blogs or those social media groups detailing patients' experience is really, really useful in gathering momentum so that they have a greater voice in that. And as a result of this, they can also represent specific conditions or specific patients to come into to join them on decisions on treatment pathway if the patient wishes to. We're very much welcome that.
Okay, Vicky Jane, your talk was absolutely fantastic. I think you missed me saying so. Really enlightening, and sort of like joined together with some of the other talks in that minority, that fear, stress, and the effect on people's mental health is just out of order. I can't think of any other way to say it. Is that my noise coming through? Or not? Okay, so I can just hear a noise coming through. Sorry on that one. I'm just going to ask you. We've got a little bit of time on. Sorry, I'm not going to ask that one. So just a little bit of time for your input on whether you think there's anything that we can do to encourage people to tick the boxes on the medical questionnaire as to sexuality. Do you think that would help? Obviously, you know, those who do research, etc., and want to know how things are affected and how somebody's patient journey goes, it would be very useful information. But do you think it's useful to keep on and should we try and encourage people to use that question?
There's two sides to this. One is people who are in mental health services that have an LGBT identity who don't reveal it because they are worried that they will then be discriminated against, or their treatment plans will be changed because of that. Had that discussion the other day with ladies, had lots of mental health problems, but she doesn't want to tell anybody that she's non-binary because that will completely confuse sort of everything. And she's worked in places where people have been sectioned, and if people are LGBT, being sectioned is not a comfortable place to be at all. But so that's a bit negative. Sorry. What can be done?
So what can we do to because it would help, I think, so that we've got the evidence, the data, so you know we've got a record of the difference. It's that fear, overcoming the fear. Yeah,
it is overcoming that fear, and
trust.
I think, and trust. So I think probably what you have to do is increase the trust first before you can collect the data, because if people do feel that their journey is going to be affected by being LGBT, but at the same time we are quite used to having to take risks if we want services to improve in the future. So you know, we do know that if we don't stand up and say that we're LGBT, that things will never improve. So there is a bit of responsibility back on us, but it increases minority stress.
Absolutely. So I'm going to have to round up now. It's been absolutely such an informative session today. I hope you've all got some things. This is not going to finish. We are going to take things forward. We're going to hopefully work all together. Vicky Jane, you're absolutely right. You know, we've got some steps to take. There's trust. There's definitely education on, you know, personal standards, etc., and interpretations of prejudice have no place in any health service. Never mind people with a neurological condition. There's just no place for them. So education, trying to get that change. Yes, I can't remember. I think it was Kit who said, you know, there is a BAME is in the or it might have been Eloise, sorry. BAME is in the public eye now, but BAME, I think, needs to then include LGBTQI+ on the top of it. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I've made lots of notes, and I'm sure Georgina has as well. So thank you very much for today.